Hey guys, before we get into the show, I just wanted to let you know I'm speaking at the Cross Border Summit in China around the Canton Fair period this coming April. I'll be speaking alongside world-renowned speakers that include Anthony Lee, Brian Johnson, Will Cherland and many, many more. So go grab a ticket at globalfromasia.com/Cross Border Summit. Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions. Again, we bring back Gary. This time we're going to be talking about Chinese factory nightmares. Hello Gary, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Danny?
Yeah, good. Do you want to give us a rundown of the product we're going to be speaking about today?
Okay. So just a quick background. I'm based in Shanghai, China, and I've been on the ground here since 2008. My previous job, I've helped a lot of various clients source products from China. So I wanted to share with our audience today a Chinese factory nightmare situation. What happened, what went wrong, and some lessons learned that maybe can save our viewers some time, money, and headaches going forward.
Superb. Sounds good. All right. Okay. So first product, what is it?
Okay, so the first product is an exercise bike. So we had a client in South America, in Brazil, and then they were opening up a gym. So it was going to be a very high-end, like very trendy gym in a nice neighborhood in Sao Paulo. And they ordered a batch about 150 exercise bikes. Yeah. And they sent us a sample. We checked the bikes in person, and then we test rode them, and then they were okay. This is the factory. So we placed the order. We visited the factory. They sent us a sample. We checked the bikes in person. We test rode them, and then they were okay. So we took a quick look and we approved it. And then we sent a sample by FedEx to the client in Brazil. Yeah. The reason behind this is we wanted to give them firsthand look at the bikes, but that was the beginning of the first nightmare, because in Brazil, the sample bike, it was held up at customs, and the customer was asked to pay some exorbitant customs duty, and then the customs duty was actually several times the cost of the bike. Yeah. And then we tried to get it released, saying that it was a sample. We gave them the commercial invoice. We said, it was samples only, no commercial value. Everything was done by the books. Yeah. A lot of email back and forth for weeks, trying to explain it was a sample, but no dice. And then in the end, we actually had to dump the sample through a personal connection that I had with FedEx, because otherwise they would have been charged thousands of dollars in import duty. So the first lesson.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously you need to check these costs and requirements. So how do you feel it got to that stage? Do you feel that the factory could have helped out a bit more here about the upfront on paperwork, or are they more considered about closing the sale? What was your take on that?
Well, from the factory side, actually, it's not their responsibility. There's no way a factory can be an international trade expert in every single country in the world, right? Yeah. But the onus actually it's actually on the client, because anytime if you're importing some product into your country, it's up to you to find out if, customs has any high import duties, or if you need an import license. And a lot of times I see with a lot of online sellers and Amazon sellers, this is something that they overlook. Yeah. And then, I was just talking to somebody today in the UK. They had emailed me, and then they asked that, they were getting some toys samples shipped into the UK, and then it was getting held up at customs. They shipped with DHL, and then they had, zero idea, what they needed to do or how much it was going to be paid. Like a smart seller, what they would do is they would find out the HS code. This is the harmonized system code that every single product has. It's like in the customs, their books. So based on that, you can find out the classification and then the import duty. And then this way you can do your homework to figure out the cost before shipping a sample. It is a nightmare because, we spend weeks going back and forth trying to clear the sample. And in the meantime, we could have, shipped the entire order already. They could have opened up their gym a few months earlier. So that's why it was a nightmare.
Can you give me an indication of cost here? Like what were the street value of these bikes, and what were they charging you in terms of fees?
Roughly, ballpark, it was about, I'd say, mid $100 to less than $200 range for a bike. That would be the FOB cost. But for Brazil, I don't know how many listeners you guys have in Brazil, but just the whole import, like the process, it's super bureaucratic. It's super complicated. And, the country, it's very protectionist in terms of their legal, the structures, because they want to protect their own manufacturing. So they're not really helping in terms of importing. So, anytime you import something, whether it's a sample or an order, you really gotta do your due diligence to make sure that the thing can clear, because that's the ultimate nightmare. I mean, if the thing gets stuck at customs and like the charges that they wanted to charge was over like $1,000, if I remember correctly, on like $100 bike. So, like they tax based on the freight cost, based on the insurance and this and that. It's like a whole laundry list. That,
do you think as well, it's like, that there's some countries, say for instance, when we shipped into Japan last year, and then we were told once you start getting like further quotes for future shipments, it's important that you are not paying, I think they called it Westerner tax or something like that, which basically means is that there are means and ways is, you might do a shipment and you might use the Chinese side to clear shipment, and it might be cheap to get it in to that process to ship it. But once it hit the Japanese side, I mean, it was all day hunting season, adding on costs and stuff. So do you think as well with Brazil, there might be, it's a bit corrupt maybe in terms, or you just think they're super strict?
Broadly speaking, there is a lot of corruption that goes on in Brazil. I think if you just look at all the presidential scandals that, we've seen in the past, few years. But at the same time, it does make sense to hire, like a professional, like whether it's, like a freight forwarder or a customs broker to just guide you through all of the complexities, especially if you're new to this starting out. So that's something, regardless of whether you're in South America or North America or EU, I think that does make sense as, you want to have a real business, not just like a fly by night operation. And then you might get slapped with all these fines going in.
Gotcha. So how did you turn the corner with this product, or did it leave you out of pocket?
Right. Okay.
Elaborate on the next phase.
Yeah. So, so after that, the sample didn't go through. So the Brazilians, they had good faith that they trusted, our evaluation. But then after the samples arrived, after the shipment arrived in Brazil, like we released the shipment, the supplier got paid, after they arrived, that's when the additional problems came up. And then there were problems with the stability of the bikes, because the Brazilians, physically, they tended to be taller, bigger, and heavier than the Chinese. So that's a, like a typical problem that, happens when you do international trade, because a lot of times, what one product may work for, maybe like an Asian country, but it may not work for, like a South American country. And then there were, noises that came up when writing, and then customers complained, and, they actually sent us some videos, and it seemed that, the bikes couldn't withstand like the really heavy, and taller Brazilians, that were, really like wearing and tearing the bikes, in these gyms. So in the end, the client demanded that the factory fix this problem. So we were the intermediary. So we had to communicate the problems, try to figure out the solutions, getting some replacement parts. And the factory, basically, they hemmed and hawed. They said, oh, in our past shipments, we never had any problems, exporting to Korea. But, I said to them, you have to understand that, Koreans don't have the same body type as Brazilians, right? I mean, Brazilians are eating like Brazilian barbecue and feijoada, all that good stuff. And, they get quite big. So you got to make sure your products, they fit the market. So finally, we were able to negotiate a deal. Several weeks back and forth. The client was very angry because their customers were complaining, and then we were able to reach an agreement with the factory to have replacement parts to be sent. And then also the factory agreed on a compensation for the defects and also the repair costs, because you have to realize that in order to hire someone to do the replacement of the replacement parts, I mean, labor is not cheap in Brazil. So you have to calculate that into the compensation as well. It was not easy because, it's very difficult to get a factory to compensate you on an order, because typically, what happens is they may agree for like a credit, like an order credit in the future order. Obviously, this entails you placing a second order with them, but we were able to negotiate a compensation for the defect and the repair costs. So the lesson learned from this is that, well, obviously, again, they had to reship all of the replacement parts. So that took, some more time, and then they had to get it installed. And meanwhile, their customers were complaining. So it wasn't good. It was a nightmare because of all these, problems that came up and all the delays and, trying to, get compensation. So the lesson learned is for products like this is to engage in a thorough test. A quick test ride may not be enough. And then also you got to consider the different local markets and the different consumer like differences. So, whether it's like an exercise equipment, if like one bike is, calibrated for like a more lightweight, like, Asian body type, but it may not withstand like, heavier build individuals from Latin America. And it also, it applies with, certain apparel items as well. You look at a lot of, clothing for Japanese markets, like, Uniqlo, for example. And then if you try to, transfer that to the North American market or the European market, problems are going to come up and arise. And, I remember the same thing happened here in China when Zara, the women's wear, the European Spanish brand came in, when they opened the first flagship store here in Shanghai. I remember I went with some female friends, and the dresses were all like, for tall Europeans, and then they were way too long for, the Chinese girls. Later Zara got it right. They were able to localize and, consider the different consumer differences. But, this is a problem that even affects the major multinationals, let alone the smaller businesses and online sellers.
No, it makes total sense. So if we were to wrap up on this point here, what would you say the 5 key lessons learned from this, and where is the company today with the bikes?
The company today with the bikes, I left this company several years ago, so I wasn't privy to the business anymore.
Yeah.
So if I were to give myself advice, from that time, I would find a way to test the bike more extensively rather than just a quick test ride. I would really, consider the local market, because like body type differences and, how people use the bikes. This factory, one good test is what I like to call the country test. I asked the factory, which countries do you typically export to? Their answer was Korea. And this should have been a red flag, looking back, is because, Koreans obviously, not to stereotype, but, they tend not to be as big as Brazilians. And then if this factory has not exported to Latin America before, there may be some growing pains. You may need to adjust the bikes.
To be honest with you, you think about Brazil. I'm from the UK. We've got an obesity epidemic over here. So I don't know the size structure of Brazilians. Most of the Brazilians I've seen are normally quite healthy, quite lean, there's plenty of sunshine, etc.
Well, there's plenty of sunshine, but if you ever get a chance to visit Brazil, there's plenty of good eating as well.
Gotcha.
They love a good, steak. They love a good pizza, Italian food. They eat quite well. They have a good time, but, it shows.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's a cultural thing, isn't it? So you've got a bike. They've shipped this bike to Korea, where a lot of people are eating pretty much high quality food. A lot of rice is being considered like less westernized food, like junk food and processed food, I imagine. So they're a lot more lean. And then you've got
Right.
these other countries where, you know, they're eating a lot of carbohydrates. There's a lot of takeaway food and stuff. Therefore, generally, the population seem to be moving towards a larger a larger body type, if you like.
Right. And I think that this is very important now as, people are expanding internationally to, different marketplaces that maybe they're not that familiar with,
Yeah.
like some people are expanding, Americans expanding into the EU, for example, I just learned, recently for Germany, you're not allowed to send email follow-ups if they didn't double opt in. There's a law against that. And,
Yeah.
a lot of times, we neglect that. We don't really do our homework before we just jump in, with 2 feet. So I think that that's a big lesson learned. You really have to do some due diligence on your the local market and consumer differences. For example, these bikes for Brazil. I mean, they were a lot bigger and heavier than the Chinese. And then, another point is with negotiating compensation. It is possible. I mean, we were able to get the factory to give the client some compensation, but it was really a pain in the butt. We were talking with the factory manager, and I'm fluent in Chinese, so that definitely that helps with the language. But I mean, I can't imagine someone sitting in like Los Angeles or someone sitting in London trying to negotiate this with a Chinese factory owner. I mean,
Normally with this stuff, you have to have some level of leverage. I've got not compensation, but I've had a few products have gone sideways, and I've offset one product against another in terms of reduced cost as well, because the factory was supplying another product. And on a recent one that we've done, we've had our second shipment sent over free of charge at this stage, because the first shipment of this product wasn't acceptable. There was no charge until we'd sold through on the item. So it's about them relationships, like what you said. But as standard, once that leaves the factory floor in China, you're lucky to get anything after that. Like, you really need to button down everything before it's left the doorstep. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to get any form of leverage.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, anytime there's any problems, you want to catch it before it leaves the factory floor, because otherwise, I mean, you got to hire someone in the UK to fix it. I mean, like those costs, they're going to eat away all of your profits.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always a good practice to catch problems before they leave the factory floor.
Without doubt. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So look, let's wrap this here. We're going to do part 2. So Gary, how can people reach you?
So they can reach me through my website, www.8020sourcing.com. And talking about negotiation, I did write a very detailed guide, a free ebook, an ultimate guide to negotiating with Chinese suppliers. If there's interest, we can have a landing page, www.8020sourcing.com/seller sessions.
Yeah.
And then our listeners can get the free ebook on negotiating, compensation with suppliers, and might be a good way, just to be aware, how to do this and what you can negotiate for besides just price.
Cool, not a problem. All right, thank you again for coming in, guys. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.